In the autumn of 1942, a small inter-service committee met weekly in London to guard the secrets of Allied operations. Among them was Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley of MI5, a man with a mind that threw up fantastic ideas. During one meeting, as they debated whether a captured radio set was being worked by the Germans or a friendly Frenchman, Cholmondeley tossed out a strange suggestion. What if they dropped a dead body into France attached to a failed parachute, he asked, to see who picked it up. Then he added a question that would echo through the months ahead. Does anyone know whether we can get a body? The committee dismissed the notion as impractical that day, but the seed had been planted. Months later, with the North Africa campaign nearing its end, the strategic problem became urgent. Sicily was the obvious next target, and everyone knew the Germans would expect it. Cholmondeley's wild idea resurfaced, this time with a sharper purpose. Ewan Montague, a lieutenant commander in naval intelligence, took hold of it. They would need a body that could pass as the victim of an aircraft crash at sea, and they needed to know what a post-mortem would reveal. Montague consulted Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the legendary pathologist, over sherry at his club. Spilsbury listened without asking why, then gave his verdict: a body that had died from pneumonia with fluid in the lungs could withstand a Spanish examination. The search for a suitable corpse began quietly, with no open inquiries that might start gossip. After weeks of dead ends, they finally located a young man who had died from pneumonia after exposure. Permission to use the body was granted on condition that his true identity would never be revealed. They chose the Spanish port of Huelva as the drop point, where a known German agent had excellent contacts with local officials. The body was placed in cold storage, waiting. By early spring of 1943, the plan had taken shape. It needed a code name, and Montague found one that had just been restored to the Admiralty list: Mincemeat. The proposal went up to the Chiefs of Staff, who gave approval in principle, then to the Prime Minister himself. Churchill studied the scheme with a practical eye. When someone warned that failure might pinpoint Sicily as the target, he brushed the objection aside. "Anybody but a damn fool would know it is Sicily," he said. When another officer worried that the papers might be returned to the British untouched, Churchill grinned. "I do not see that matters either. We can always try again." With that, Operation Mincemeat received its final clearance. The team now had a body, a target, and the highest authority to proceed. The absurd idea born in a committee room was about to become a weapon of war. The first problem was what uniform to put on the corpse. Montague wanted the body to belong to an officer who fell under Admiralty control, not the War Office. A naval officer would need a tailored uniform they could not possibly produce. The Royal Marines offered the perfect compromise. They were part of the Navy but wore battle dress like the Army, which meant one could buy standard sizes and adapt them. But the Marines were a small corps, and every officer knew every other. A photograph was needed for the identity card, and every picture of the corpse looked unmistakably dead. Montague and Cholmondeley began a quiet, awkward search for a living man who resembled the body closely enough to pass for him in a poor photograph. They found their double in a young naval officer who could have been the dead man's twin. With that photograph, Major William Martin of the Royal Marines came into existence. The name was chosen because the Navy list showed several officers named Martin, which would make any casual inquiries harder to pin down. A man with official papers needed personal effects, too. The team decided Major Martin should be engaged to be married. A man carrying love letters was a man with a real life. A young woman working in the War Office lent them her photograph under the cover story that they needed it for an identity parade. An anonymous girl, whose name the team never learned, wrote 2 letters from Pam to Bill Martin. One was on elegant country house notepaper, the other scrawled hastily in a government office while her boss was out. They were passionate, urgent letters that made the reader feel he knew the woman who wrote them. The rest of the pocket contents built a complete life story. There was an overdraft notice from Lloyd's Bank, signed by the joint general manager himself, demanding payment of just under £80. A stern letter from Major Martin's father insisted he must make a will before any marriage took place. The bill for a diamond ring from a Bond Street jeweler was tucked into the wallet. 2 theater ticket stubs from the Prince of Wales Theatre suggested a farewell party. Every single item was carefully aged by hand, folded and unfolded again and again until the paper had the soft patina of daily use. With the courier ready, the team needed documents important enough to divert armies. Lord Louis Mountbatten, the Chief of Combined Operations, wrote to Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham, the naval commander in the Mediterranean. His letter explained that Major Martin was carrying a vital personal message for General Alexander. It was too sensitive for official signals. In a deliberate hint planted for German eyes, Mountbatten asked Cunningham to send Martin back with some sardines. That clumsy joke pointed directly at Sardinia as a target. Mountbatten wrote a second letter to General Dwight Eisenhower. He said Major Martin was bringing proofs of a new pamphlet about combined operations and asked Eisenhower to write a foreword. This gave Major Martin a plausible reason to carry a briefcase full of documents. It also established him as a trusted officer who moved freely at the highest levels. Any German who read these letters would find it entirely natural that such a man had been entrusted with secret papers. The heart of the deception was a letter from General Sir Archibald Nye, the Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Harold Alexander, who commanded the 18th Army Group in Tunisia. Nye wrote in the easy style of one old friend to another, as if he were explaining decisions that could not be put into official cables. He spoke of two operations. According to the letter, one was codenamed Brimstone, a supposed real assault on Sardinia. The other was codenamed Husky, allegedly aimed at Greece. Sicily, he mentioned almost casually, was merely a cover target to confuse the Germans. Every detail in that letter was a lie designed to be believed. The real Husky was the invasion of Sicily, not Greece. The Sardinian plan was the fiction, not the truth. But because Nye had typed it on his official notepaper and then signed it with his own signature and sealed it with his own seal, the Germans would have no reason to doubt. He dated the letter April 23, 1943, St. George's Day. The paper was heavy, the ink dark, the signature familiar to anyone who had seen it before. Major Martin now had his purpose. On the afternoon of April the 17th, Montagu and Cholmondeley paid their final visit to the cold storage facility in London. The body that had rested there for weeks lay wrapped in a blanket, stiff from the freezing temperatures. They had measured the corpse weeks earlier, but now came the moment of truth. The Royal Marine battle dress, the trench coat, the boots, the webbing gaiters, and the Mae West life jacket were all laid out on a table. Beside them stood the steel canister that would carry their creation to war. The canister, just under 6.5 feet long and 2 feet in diameter, was marked on the outside with the label Optical Instruments. It sat open on its end, already packed with dry ice that sent clouds of vapor drifting across the room. Then came the first crisis. The boots would not go on. The corpse's feet were frozen solid, the ankles locked at a right angle, and no amount of force could bend them into the proper position. If the team forced the boots on, they risked tearing the flesh or leaving marks that a Spanish doctor would notice. Montagu remembered Sir Bernard Spilsbury's warning: any post-mortem injury inflicted after death could be detected and would unravel the entire deception. There was only one choice. They carried an electric fire into the cold room and carefully thawed the feet and ankles, working in grim silence. Once the joints had softened, they laced the boots on, tied the gaiters, and then, with sincere apologies to the dead man, returned the body to cold storage for the final time. Now came the last act of creation. They dressed the body completely in the battle dress of a Royal Marine acting major, with the crown and pips sewn onto the shoulders and combined operations flashes on the sleeves. Into the pockets they placed every carefully aged document. There were the love letters from Pam, the father's letter demanding a will, and the overdraft notice from Lloyd's Bank. Also included were the bill for the engagement ring from Bond Street and the stubs from the Prince of Wales Theatre. They also added the identity card, with its photograph taken from a living naval officer who had served as a double, and placed a silver cross on a chain around the neck. The black official briefcase containing the letters from Mountbatten and the vital deception letter from General Nye was chained to the belt of the trench coat. Every detail was checked, double-checked, and then checked again. When the body was fully dressed and loaded with its cargo of lies, they wrapped it in a clean blanket to prevent friction during the journey. They lifted the body into the canister, which stood upright on a loading dock, and packed it carefully with fresh, dry ice. The dry ice would melt into carbon dioxide, displacing the oxygen that would otherwise speed decomposition. Montagu and Cholmondeley worked the lid into place, tightened the 16 nuts with the box spanner that would be chained to the lid for the journey, and sealed the canister tight. The total weight, with the body and ice inside, came to more than 400 pounds. They loaded the canister into Jock Horsfall's 30-hundredweight Ford van, and the strange convoy set out for Scotland. The drive to Greenock took the entire night. Horsfall, a racing motorist on special duty with the War Office, took the wheel while Montague and Cholmondeley traded shifts, sleeping on the metal floor of the van. The route ran north through dimmed headlights and blacked-out towns. They drove past one roundabout by mounting the curb and crossing the center grass. At one point, aircraft engines rumbled overhead and everyone in the van tensed, waiting for bombs, but the planes passed on. They took turns guarding the canister when they stopped for fuel. If a thief broke the seal, he would face a rude shock. The operation would be dead before it began. They reached Greenock before midday on April the 18th. A signal from the Director of Naval Intelligence had requested a party to help lift a 400-pound package, but the signal had been read wrong. Only one rating was waiting on the dock. Montague found a wren he knew from an earlier posting, who quickly arranged a proper working party with ropes to lower the canister into the launch. They ferried the canister and the rubber dinghy out to HMS Seraph, the submarine that would carry Major Martin to his final destination. Lieutenant Norman Jewell, the young commander of Seraph, took charge of the cargo. The canister was stowed inside the pressure hull. On the evening of April the 19th, Seraph slipped her moorings at Holy Loch and sailed south into the Irish Sea, bound for the coast of Spain. At 4:15 in the morning on April 30th, HMS Seraph surfaced off the coast of Huelva. The sea was calm, the sky overcast with low clouds, and a light wind blew from the southwest. Lieutenant Jewell brought the submarine to periscope depth and scanned the shoreline. Fishing boats lay at anchor a mile off, but the mist and darkness provided cover. At 4:15, the crew opened the steel canister on deck. Inside, wrapped in a clean blanket, lay the body of Major Martin. Jewell checked the briefcase chained to the belt and inflated the Mae West life jacket until it was rock hard. At 4:30 precisely, the body was lifted and lowered gently into the water. Jewell ordered the submarine screws run full speed astern, and the wash pushed the corpse steadily toward the shore. Half a mile south, a rubber dinghy was launched upside down to suggest a hasty evacuation from a sinking aircraft. Then the Seraph withdrew to deeper water. The empty steel canister was pushed over the side, but it refused to sink. The crew riddled it with fire from a Vickers machine gun and revolvers at close range until it finally went down in 300 fathoms. At 7:15, Jewell signaled Gibraltar, Mincemeat completed. Later that same morning, a Spanish fisherman working the inshore waters spotted a floating object. He hailed a nearby launch which brought the body to the beach. A Spanish army officer happened to be exercising a detachment of infantry on that stretch of sand, and he took charge. A naval judicial officer was summoned. He examined the body, found the briefcase and the wallet with its identity cards and personal letters, and ordered everything removed to the mortuary at Huelva. A doctor performed a medical examination and certified that the man had fallen into the sea while still alive, with no bruises or injuries, and that death was due to asphyxiation by drowning after 5 to 8 days in the water. The British vice-consul at Huelva was notified. The body was formally handed over to him for burial. On May 1st at noon, Major William Martin of the Royal Marines was laid to rest in the cemetery at Huelva with full military honors. Spanish military and civilian authorities attended the service. The coffin was draped with a Union flag. A firing party presented arms, and a bugler sounded the last post. The vice-consul placed a wreath on the grave from Pam and the family, white flowers gathered from the garden of a local English mining company. In London, Montague and Cholmondeley waited for news. On May 3rd, a signal arrived from the naval attaché in Madrid. The body had been recovered and buried, but there was no mention of the briefcase or the official documents. The attaché made a formal demand for the papers, careful not to show too much anxiety. The Spanish Minister of Marine replied that the documents were passing through naval channels and would reach Madrid in due course. Days passed. The team in London fretted but held their nerve, sending measured signals that increased in urgency just enough to seem genuine. On May 13th, the Spanish Chief of Naval Staff handed the naval attaché all of Major Martin's effects. The black briefcase was open with the key still in the lock. The attaché thanked him and signaled London. Everything was there. Scientific tests later revealed that the letters had been carefully removed from their envelopes and then replaced, with the seals skillfully resealed to appear untouched. The Germans in Madrid, alerted by their contacts, soon obtained copies of the documents and sent detailed reports to Berlin. The deception was in enemy hands. When the chiefs of staff learned that the documents had reached the Germans and been accepted as genuine, they sent a cryptic signal to Prime Minister Churchill in Washington: mincemeat swallowed whole. Now only one question remained. Would the Germans believe what they had stolen on the 14th of May, 1943? The German intelligence service in Berlin issued a formal appreciation. They had received copies of the documents found on the body of Major Martin from their agents in Spain. The assessment was categorical. The captured letters were genuine, above any suspicion of being a plant. The intelligence staff recommended that the German High Command treat the information as fact and act accordingly. That same day, Adolf Hitler reviewed the documents and the intelligence report. He did not hesitate. The Führer was already predisposed to believe that the Allies would strike at Greece and Sardinia. The letter from General Sir Archibald Nye to General Alexander confirmed his own thinking. Hitler immediately issued orders to divert the 1st Panzer Division from France to Greece. The division was to establish its headquarters at Tripolis in the Peloponnese, ideally placed to meet the landings the Allies had supposedly planned for Kalamata and Cape Araxos. German naval commanders also received urgent instructions. New minefields were to be laid off the coast of Greece, including off Kalamata itself. Coastal defense batteries were to be installed under German control in territory previously held by the Italians. The entire defense of the eastern Mediterranean was reshaped overnight. Troops, ships, and aircraft that might have reinforced Sicily were instead sent to the Greek mainland and islands. The deception had taken hold at the highest level. In London, the men who had created Major Martin waited for the German reaction. They could not know for certain whether the documents had been believed, but they continued to play their part in the cover story. On June 4th, the casualty list published in the Times included the name of Temporary Captain, Acting Major William Martin, Royal Marines. The list also contained the names of 2 senior naval officers who had died when an aircraft was lost at sea. If any German observer checked the newspapers, the coincidence would seem natural and confirm the story of a flight that ended in disaster. The Germans did notice. Their reports from Madrid had already mentioned that Major Martin carried theater ticket stubs dated April 22nd and a club bill from the 27th. The Times listing on the June 4th fit the timeline perfectly. The illusion held. The German intelligence service saw no reason to doubt that a real officer had died in a real crash. Their confidence in the documents remained absolute. Through June, the German High Command continued to shift its defensive weight. More troops were sent to Sardinia and Corsica. The northern coast of Sicily received priority for fortification, while the southern and eastern beaches were left comparatively weak. The German Naval Command sent a flotilla of R-boats, German motor minesweepers, from Sicily to the Aegean, creating a gap in the patrols around the island. Every move was based on the belief that the main Allied blow would fall on Greece, with Sicily no more than a feint. On the 10th of July, the Allied invasion of Sicily began under the cover of darkness. In the early hours of the morning, assault troops hit the southern and eastern shores, precisely where the weakest defenses remained. The German garrison was caught off balance, their reserves committed elsewhere. The weeks of shifting forces to Greece, Sardinia, and the northern coast had stripped the genuine landing zones of adequate protection. The German High Command did not immediately realize the deception. For 2 days after the landings, their commanders still believed that the main attack was yet to come. Hitler ordered a special lookout for convoys that might be heading to Corsica and Sardinia. He was convinced that the Sicilian operation was a diversion. Only on the 12th of July did the German naval commander in Italy begin to complain bitterly that the departure of the R-boat flotilla had prejudiced the defense of Sicily. The shortage of small craft was chronic. The gap in patrols could not be filled. By the time the German High Command accepted that the true target was Sicily, it was too late to shift the bulk of their forces. The 1st Panzer Division remained in Greece, useless. The defenses of Sardinia and Corsica were fully manned, but never tested. The deception had bought the Allies the most precious commodity in war. Time, the invasion of Sicily proceeded with fewer casualties than had been feared, and the enemy never recovered the lost ground in the battle for the island. Operation Mincemeat stands as one of the most successful counterintelligence operations of the Second World War. A single corpse, a brief case of forged letters, and months of painstaking detail had misdirected the German High Command at a critical moment. The man who never was saved real lives. His grave in Huelva, marked with a white marble stone bearing the name William Martin, remains a quiet monument to a lie that changed history. After the war, Montagu returned to his legal career and wrote this account. Cholmondeley served in intelligence until his death. Jewel remained in the Royal Navy, retiring as a captain. The girl who wrote Pam's letters faded back into anonymity, her work never publicly acknowledged. Sir Archibald Nye continued his distinguished service before moving to high diplomatic posts overseas. Sir Bernard Spilsbury had provided the crucial pathological assurance that allowed the operation to move forward. Lord Louis Mountbatten went on to serve as the last Viceroy of India, and later as First Sea Lord. Jock Horsfall returned to his pre-war career as a racing motorist and engineer, and the young woman whose photograph was used as Pam returned to her work in the War Office, her contribution known only to a few. If you have any stories from family members who served in the Mediterranean campaign, or if you know of other deception operations that shaped the war, we would love to hear them in the comments. Please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like to support our future historical documentaries. Thank you for listening.